Jean-Claude Van Damme finally breaks his silence on Steven Seagal, and what he says isn't just shocking, it's worse than anyone imagined. For years, fans begged for answers, speculated about their rivalry, and even hoped for a legendary on-screen reunion. Instead, they got something far more explosive. It all started with a cryptic Instagram post that looked like peace, but it was the calm before the storm. Now, after decades of tension, Van Damme has stepped forward with brutal honesty, and what he reveals changes everything you thought you knew about Seagal, their feud, and the truth behind Hollywood's biggest martial arts myth. The silent war began in the early 1990s. If you walked into a video rental store, two names practically leapt off the shelves: Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal. They were titans of testosterone, martial arts legends in the eyes of their fans, and symbols of what it meant to be a real action hero. One came with spinning kicks and tournament medals, the other brought sharp Aikido wristlocks and a stare colder than steel. But what fans didn't know back then was that behind the high-octane fight scenes and slow-motion explosions, a real-life feud was simmering, one far more personal and far less choreographed. At first, there was no obvious conflict, no public insults, no tabloid headlines. But if you listened closely to the interviews and the backstage chatter, you'd notice something odd. Steven Seagal had a habit of casually dismissing other martial artists, especially Van Damme. In press junkets and behind-the-scenes conversations, he referred to Van Damme not as a fighter but as a dancer. A jab at Van Damme's early ballet training meant to discredit his combat skills without ever naming him outright. It was subtle, even sly, but those in the industry caught the tone. Seagal didn't respect Van Damme, not as an actor, not as a martial artist. Van Damme, at least publicly, said nothing. He was too busy launching blockbuster after blockbuster: Bloodsport, Kickboxer, Universal Soldier, Time Cop. He had real tournament experience under his belt and a reputation for training obsessively. His kicks weren't just for show, they were weapons. But despite the silence, insiders knew the tension was real. Crew members and stunt coordinators would talk about how the two stars were never invited to the same events, how producers had to choose one or the other for fear of starting drama. It wasn't open warfare, but it wasn't peace either. The rivalry became a kind of open secret. Fans debated it endlessly. Who would win in a real fight? Was Seagal's Aikido effective in real life? Could Van Damme's speed overpower his technique? The debate spilled into magazine covers, martial arts forums, and late-night talk shows. Everyone had an opinion, everyone picked a side. But the two men kept their distance, never confronting each other directly, until one night, that changed. But that's for later. For now, it's important to understand that this wasn't just a personal rivalry, this was a clash of philosophies. Van Damme represented the flashy, high-energy, fight-tested style of tournament kickboxing and traditional martial arts. Seagal stood for the grounded, mysterious aura of Aikido, fluid, elusive, almost spiritual. Their on-screen personas mirrored the way they moved through Hollywood. Van Damme was charming, emotional, and often wore his heart on his sleeve. Seagal was brooding, distant, and always seemed to be hiding something just beneath the surface. And yet, despite the tension, they remained linked. Every time Van Damme had a new hit, Seagal would fire back with a role of his own. Every time Seagal's films took a darker, more serious turn, Van Damme would double down on emotional storylines and vulnerability. It was like watching two artists paint on opposite sides of the same canvas, different styles, different strokes, but always in contrast with one another. By the end of the decade, the tension between them wasn't just a Hollywood rumor, it was a Cold War that had lasted years. A war of silence. A war of glances. And most of all, a war of pride. Because behind all the interviews, the roundhouse kicks, and the stoic monologues, these weren't just movie stars, they were martial artists. And in their world, respect isn't given, it's earned. And soon, one of them would demand it the only way he knew how. The Stallone party incident: for years, the feud stayed quiet, an undercurrent beneath the surface of Hollywood's high-octane action scene. But then came the party, a gathering that was supposed to be casual, even celebratory, the kind of event where legends let loose and everyone leaves with a handshake or a story. Hosted by none other than Sylvester Stallone, the man who had brought many action heroes under one roof in his Expendables years later, this party would go down as the night everything nearly blew up, literally. It was the late 1990s, and the golden era of muscle-bound, one-liner dropping heroes was beginning to dim. But at Stallone's mansion, the spirits were high, and the guest list was stacked: Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, and more. And among them, two men who had never shared a film, barely shared a sentence, and definitely didn't share respect: Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal. By most accounts, things started out civil: drinks, stories, laughter. But then, Seagal, as he'd done before, began to talk. Not about his own films or achievements, but about others. According to Stallone himself, Seagal's comments drifted into familiar territory, mocking Van Damme's background, calling him overrated, questioning his authenticity as a martial artist. Maybe he didn't expect Van Damme to hear it. Maybe he didn't care. But Van Damme heard. And this time, he wasn't interested in staying silent. What happened next has become Hollywood legend. Van Damme confronted Seagal directly, face to face, no cameras, no stunt doubles. He didn't throw a punch. Instead, he issued a challenge: step outside and settle it like real martial artists. According to Stallone, Seagal brushed him off and tried to laugh it away. Van Damme didn't flinch. He pressed again, telling him to back up his words. Seagal declined. He left the party altogether. Now, this could have ended there, a tense moment, sure, but nothing explosive. But Van Damme wasn't done. Later that night, he tracked Seagal down to a nearby nightclub, where Seagal had gone to escape the heat. And again, in front of stunned onlookers, Van Damme challenged him to a fight. Once more, Seagal refused. The incident quickly morphed into myth. Some claimed it was staged, others said it nearly turned violent. Stallone, however, confirmed it years later, calling it one of the most intense confrontations he'd ever witnessed at a party. His words were blunt: Van Damme was too strong. Seagal wanted no part of him. For Van Damme, this wasn't about showmanship, it was about honor. If someone questioned your discipline, your training, your legitimacy, you defended it, not with trash talk, but with proof. In his world, martial arts wasn't just choreography, it was a way of life. A code. And Seagal had broken it. But Seagal's refusal didn't hurt him in Hollywood, not immediately. He kept making films, kept cultivating his mysterious persona. Yet among martial arts purists and behind the scenes, the story stuck, not just that Seagal walked away, but that he did so twice in the face of someone who actually wanted to fight. Van Damme, for his part, never bragged about the incident. He didn't do a Van press tour about it. He didn't write it into a movie. He let it sit, let the silence speak for itself. But the damage was done. The Cold War had escalated. And there was no going back. That night didn't settle the score, but it made one thing clear: this feud wasn't media hype. It was personal. And Van Damme, whether people knew it or not, was just getting started. The $20 million fight that never happened by the early 2000s, the flames of the feud between Van Damme and Seagal had dimmed in public view, but behind closed doors, it was still very much alive. The party incident had turned into a cautionary tale in Hollywood circles, one of those whispered stories everyone swore they heard from someone who was there. Yet neither man had ever gone on the record to clear the air, or settle the score. Not in the ring. Not on screen. Not even in words. And then, just when it seemed like the rivalry might fade into distant memory, something resurfaced, something huge. In a 2023 interview with The Telegraph, Van Damme casually dropped a revelation that sent shockwaves through the action movie community. With a calm, almost amused tone, he said he had once been offered $20 million to fight Steven Seagal, not a movie fight, a real fight. In Las Vegas. The location? The Mirage Casino. The idea? A high-profile martial arts showdown between the two biggest names in the business. 2 black belts. 1 ring. No stunt doubles. They were having an idea to have a fight between me and Steven at the Mirage. $20 million each. He didn't take the fight. The statement landed like a punch to the gut, quiet, direct, but impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a rumor or a fantasy cooked up by fans. It was a serious proposal by none other than Peter Guber, a heavyweight producer in the industry. The money was real. The venue was real. And Van Damme said yes. But Seagal never showed. The media picked up the quote and ran with it. YouTube channels dissected it. Forums lit up. Fans couldn't believe it. Some were stunned that the offer had even been made, others couldn't believe Seagal turned it down. $20 million. A packed arena. The fight of the decade. And he walked away. Of course, questions followed. Why didn't Seagal accept? Was it fear? Was it ego? Or was it something more calculated, an unwillingness to risk the image he had built so carefully over the years? Seagal, after all, had always leaned more on mystique than on proving himself in a ring. While Van Damme had actual competitive fighting experience, Seagal's career had been rooted in demonstrations, not tournaments. His Aikido background, while real, was never battle-tested in the same way. There was also the issue of pride. If Seagal believed himself above that kind of spectacle, maybe he saw the offer as beneath him. Or maybe he knew that a real fight would settle more than just a rivalry, it would reveal truths about both men's legacies that couldn't be undone. Van Damme didn't gloat when he told the story. In fact, there was a strange restraint to the way he said it, almost like someone finally tired of keeping a secret that no one believed. He didn't need to exaggerate. The numbers spoke for themselves. The silence on Seagal's end spoke louder. And yet, even with that story out in the open, no real closure followed. Seagal never responded. No rematch was proposed. No late-career fight ever materialized. The opportunity passed, like so many legends do, quietly fading into what ifs and speculation. But for fans, that offer, that lost moment, became more than just a missed payday. It became the symbol of the entire Van Damme-Seagal saga, a rivalry built on pride, inflated by silence, and defined by a fight that never happened. And what came next would only make that absence more glaring. Because just when the world started to believe the feud was cooling off, Van Damme made a move no one saw coming, one that would change everything. The Instagram illusion. It happened quietly. No press release. No red carpet. No dramatic trailer. Just a single Instagram post from Jean-Claude Van Damme that, within hours, had fans doing double takes. There he was, smiling over dinner, clinking glasses, and sitting at the same table as Steven Seagal. Yes, that's Steven Seagal. The caption read like a friendly toast: "Thank you, Steven and your family, for the fantastic dinner. Wishing you a happy birthday. Big announcement coming soon." And just like that, the internet exploded. After decades of icy silence, cryptic jabs, and near showdowns, the sight of these two sitting down together sent the action movie world into a frenzy. Was it a sign of reconciliation? A long-awaited truce? Or the start of something even bigger? Comment sections lit up with theories. Some fans were euphoric: finally, the legends united. Others were confused: wait, wasn't Van Damme the one who challenged him to fight outside Stallone's house? And then there were the diehards who analyzed the video frame by frame, looking for clues. Was Van Damme really smiling? Did Seagal look tense? Was that toast sincere, or just for the camera? Media outlets ran with it. "Peace at last," read one headline. "Van Damme and Seagal reunite after decades," said another. In a world where celebrity feuds often end in Twitter apologies and joint projects, this looked like the happy ending no one dared expect. But there was something off. Something just beneath the surface. The video was short, carefully cropped. No audio. No behind-the-scenes shots. Just a slow pan across the table, Van Damme nodding, Seagal looking stone-faced in the background. And that final line in the caption: "Big announcement coming soon." That's what stuck with people. What kind of announcement? A film? A documentary? A martial arts exhibition? Was this just clever marketing, or was something actually brewing behind the scenes? Van Damme gave no follow-up. And Seagal, as always, said nothing at all. The silence only deepened the mystery. And the timing felt strange. It wasn't just any random dinner, it was Seagal's birthday, a rare personal moment that suddenly became a very public event. Why now? Why post it? Why tease a collaboration after so many years of dodging each other, of taking subtle digs, of avoiding any real acknowledgement? Some fans believed it was genuine. Others weren't so sure. If Van Damme had truly buried the hatchet, why hadn't he said more? Why hadn't Seagal? Why not show them shaking hands, laughing, embracing, like Stallone and Schwarzenegger eventually did? Why the restraint? Why the perfectly staged ambiguity? Theories spread fast. Maybe it was all hype for a film that had been in quiet development. Maybe they were finally cashing in on the feud that had followed them their entire careers. Or maybe, just maybe, there was more to the story that hadn't come out yet. Something deeper. Something darker. Because while most people took the post at face value, longtime fans of both men noticed something different in Van Damme's expression. A flicker in his eyes. Not hostility. Not joy. Something else entirely. He hadn't said much. But something about the timing, the silence, and the calculated wording made it clear, this wasn't just a reunion. It was a setup for something else. Something bigger. And that big announcement, he teased? It was coming. But it wasn't what anyone expected. Van Damme breaks silence. When Jean-Claude Van Damme finally broke his silence, it didn't come with fireworks or fanfare. No viral video. No dramatic confrontation. Just one interview, quiet, composed, and devastating. After years of rumors, missed fights, and carefully controlled public images, he dropped the one sentence that changed everything: "He is a fraud." There it was. No hesitation. No walking it back. Just pure honesty, delivered in a tone that didn't sound angry, only tired. Tired of the myth. Tired of the silence. And tired of a man he clearly believed had been hiding behind smoke and mirrors for decades. For Van Damme, this wasn't about ego anymore. It was about setting the record straight. He spoke with the kind of clarity that comes after years of letting things slide, and now, he wasn't letting anything slide anymore. He claimed that Steven Seagal had spent much of his career pretending to be something he wasn't, not just an action star, but a martial arts legend without the receipts to back it up. He talks about training CIA guys, fighting off bad guys in real life, but he's never fought in a real tournament. Not one. Never stepped into a ring like I did. The statement landed hard, not just because of what he said, but because of who was saying it. Van Damme wasn't just another critic or keyboard warrior. He was someone who had earned his stripes, who had fought competitively, who had trained for years, and put his body on the line. His words carried weight. And he knew it. And he didn't stop there. He brought up the $20 million fight offer again, this time with more context. They offered us both the same deal. Big money. Real crowd. Las Vegas. I said yes. He didn't. The implication was clear. Seagal had his chance, a public stage, a moment to settle everything, and he walked away. Then, Van Damme circled back to the Instagram post, the one that had fans buzzing with hope just weeks before. The dinner wasn't what it seemed. That dinner? It wasn't friendship. It was observation. I wanted to see if anything had changed. And it hadn't. He explained that after all this time, he had hoped maybe Seagal had grown, matured, let go of the persona. But what he saw only confirmed what he'd suspected all along. The bravado was still there. The tall tales. The posturing. But the foundation beneath it? Hollow. According to Van Damme, that big announcement he teased in the post? This was it. Not a movie. Not a collaboration. Just the truth. And the truth, as it turns out, was worse than anyone expected. Because while fans had spent years debating who would win in a fight, who had the better kicks, the more iconic films, the real story was never about a physical matchup. It was about respect. And what Van Damme finally revealed wasn't just an insult. It was a dismantling, a way of pulling back the curtain and exposing the machinery behind a career built more on mystery than merit. The silence was broken. The feud, now out in the open, was no longer about rumors or second-hand accounts. It was direct. It was personal. And it was permanent. Jean-Claude Van Damme finally breaks silence on Steven Seagal, and it's worse than you think. Not because he shouted or fought, but because he spoke plainly. And sometimes, the truth hits harder than any punch. Fallout and legacy rewritten once the words were out. He is a fraud, there was no pulling them back. Van Damme had finally said what many had only whispered for years, and the reaction was instant. Fans, critics, martial artists, and former collaborators all weighed in. Some were shocked. Some were vindicated. But almost no one stayed neutral. The silent rivalry had become a public reckoning. And the question now was, where do the legends go from here? Steven Seagal didn't respond. Not officially. Not in interviews. Not even through a vague social media post. He stayed quiet, as he always had when controversy swirled. But this time, the silence didn't feel like mystery. It felt like absence. A void. A missed opportunity to defend, or deny. His defenders scrambled to reinterpret the comments, suggesting Van Damme was just bitter or that this was all for publicity. But that explanation didn't stick. Because Van Damme hadn't delivered his words like a man looking for headlines. He sounded like someone who had finally had enough. Online, the conversation changed overnight. Clips from Seagal's old interviews were reposted and picked apart. Those wild stories he used to tell, about fighting off gangsters, training elite operatives, breaking arms behind closed doors, suddenly felt more like fantasy than folklore. Meanwhile, videos of Van Damme in real tournaments resurfaced, footage of him training, sparring, bleeding, winning. The contrast became unavoidable. Even martial artists began to chime in. Some politely backed Van Damme's position. Others were more direct, saying that Seagal had long enjoyed a reputation that wasn't earned in real combat. What had once been unspoken, out of respect, fear, or politics, was now part of the public conversation. And the longer Seagal stayed silent, the louder that conversation became. But the impact went beyond reputation. Fans who had grown up idolizing both men were forced to reassess. It wasn't about taking sides anymore. It was about truth. What did it mean to be a martial artist? Was it about image or effort? Performance or practice? And could one still be a legend if the foundation of that legend was, as Van Damme put it, a carefully constructed illusion? For Van Damme, the aftermath was oddly quiet. No follow-up interviews. No press tour. He let his words stand. Maybe that was the point. After decades of dancing around the subject, he had finally confronted it head-on. And in doing so, he didn't just settle a personal score. He rewrote the narrative. The years of silence. The Instagram post. The hopeful speculation. It had all been leading to this. Still, not everyone turned on Seagal. Some fans remained fiercely loyal, insisting his influence on martial arts cinema couldn't be dismissed. And that's true, to a degree. His early films helped popularize Aikido and introduced a different kind of on-screen combat. But legacy isn't just built on what you portray. It's built on what you prove. And that's where the story of Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal ultimately lands, not in a cage match or a movie, but in the undeniable contrast between two men who walked the same stage but lived very different truths. One built his career on documented discipline, competitive fights, and emotional vulnerability. The other built his on mystery, authority, and myth. And in the end, when the silence finally broke, it wasn't fists or kicks that left the deepest impact. It was honesty. For the first time in over 30 years, the feud had an ending. Not in reconciliation. Not in violence. But in revelation. And for those who grew up watching both men, that ending may not have been what they hoped for, but it was exactly what they needed. After decades of silence, challenges, and missed opportunities, Van Damme finally said what so many had wondered. So now the question is yours: was Steven Seagal ever the real deal, or just the greatest performance of his career?